Hi, welcome back to Kingdom Portions. This week we're looking at Leviticus chapter 9 through chapter 11. It's amazing because we're going to see some more behaviors of the Father's house above. Not only how he lights his sacrifice through supernatural means, but also we're going to get to see what happens when people don't do the exact instructions in a sad case. But more than anything, it brings a wonderful attention to the heart of the matter, which is what's displayed with a conversation between Aaron and Moses. In addition to that, we're going to get to see what the Father declares as actual food.
Right.
So that would mean the food that he eats. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us, guys. Hi, welcome back to Kingdom Portions here on Kingdom in Context. I'm Sean Griffin, and I'm accompanied by my incredible and lovely co-host.
Hey guys, I'm Lindsay. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, sweetie.
Shabbat Shalom, babe.
Guys, thank you for joining us again this week. We're looking at Leviticus chapter 9 through the end of chapter 11, and we've got some really fun pairings. I'm excited about it, just because there's so much being covered in these few chapters, but we're going to do our best to make it succinct and really hone in on what we feel is something that you can walk away with and benefit from, because we're learning about the behavior of the Father's house, good and bad, as far as what to do, what not to do, and even what to eat and what not to eat, right? So we're actually going to be seeing more behavior of what you and I will be experiencing as royal priests after the resurrection when we're taken to the Father's house, which is called the New Jerusalem. So I'm excited about it, and I hope you are too. I thank you for joining us. If this is your first time seeing Kingdom in Context, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and then also the little bell for notifications so you won't miss any new videos we put out. You're welcome to peruse the channel. We got a lot of different videos under the playlists that can really help you get familiarized with what we're doing and our efforts so far. If you do enjoy what we're doing, we also have links in the description of this video for both Patreon, PayPal, and even a P.O. box, because a lot of folks have decided that they want to actually support us to make sure we continue to do this. Now, the only principle we stand on for that type of support, sweetie, is I always try to remind folks, because we do abide by the scriptures as much as we understand, as much as we can. We're always promoting the idea that the whole Bible is relevant. So this whole concept is that we're not Levite priests. We're not accepting any kind of tithe. This is nothing but a love, support, donation from people that do love what we're doing. They want to see us keep doing it. And so therefore, it's an avenue for them to do that. And the scriptural principle that we stand on for that is basically when Yeshua sent his disciples out to go preach the gospel of the kingdom of God, which is what we do here on this channel. He said, don't take any money with you, because if your message, essentially he's saying, if your message blesses those to whom you're speaking to, they'll in turn bless you. This is also what Paul references as far as those who literally are, supported by the gospel, because that's what they're preaching. That's what all their effort and focus is going to. And he actually kind of quotes an Old Testament verse when he's talking about that in 2 Corinthians, where he says, don't muzzle the ox while it's treading. So it's even a principle all the way back in Deuteronomy. But we thank you for prayerfully considering that. And for everyone else that, if you've already donated to us, like all of our patrons, I just want to give a big shout out and thank you to you for faithfully being with us every month. And anyone that's, donated through the other avenues, we lovingly and wholeheartedly thank you for doing that, because that's been such a blessing to us. And it actually has allowed us to put out what we're doing and to even continue to do the new shows that we got coming out, as well as season 2 of Honor of Kings. So even though right now we're not putting out but like 1 or 2 videos a week, I don't think people realize how much we got coming. So we got a lot of fun new stuff happening, but we're working on it. And that's this is kind of like our off season, if you will. So yeah, we're working on it. But here at the end of April, we're going to be releasing some new series, and Honor of Kings Part 2 or Season 2 is coming back. So everyone, thank you for your love and your prayers and your support. We really appreciate you. We do. Sweetie, any announcements you'd like to make before we start?
We did start a Facebook study group. So if you're on Facebook and you'd like to, fellowship with us and some other people who watch the channel, we're on there under Kingdom in Context / Hanging on His Words study group. We've partnered with our brother Ken Heidebrecht and his YouTube channel, Hanging on His Words. And yeah, it's just a place to, online hangout, online fellowship, that kind of thing. We post the portions there and the pairings if you like to study ahead of time. If you ever have questions about something that we teach, that's a great place to come and ask about it. If you have rebuttals to anything we teach, you can come be our guest, post it in the group, and we'll discuss it with you as we have time. But more than anything, we know a lot of people just enjoy the online fellowship, and Sean and I The Facebook app is just easier and better as far as notifying us of comments and things like that. So having ongoing conversations, it's just a little easier on that platform. I rarely get notifications from YouTube about actual comments and things like that.
That's one of the reasons why we started that particular group on Facebook. It's really good about sending us notifications, whereas the YouTube app is not. So if you've ever asked a question on one of my videos and I haven't been able to get back to you, not only am I working a full-time job in addition to this, so unfortunately I don't always have the time to answer every single question, especially if I've already done an entire video about it. But sometimes I do want to answer them, but I just don't even see them for like 2 or 3 weeks, or even as longer than that sometimes. So it's sad, but that's just unfortunately the technology we're dealing with, which is why we created the Facebook group. So it's called Kingdom in Context / Hanging on His Words. And you're welcome to go search that out on Facebook, find us. It's really, really simple to do. So you're welcome to join. All right. We'd love to converse with you. Otherwise, I'm excited to jump right into our readings because we got a lot of fun stuff to cover, and we hope that it's going to bless you. So do you want to start, or do you want me to?
I'll let you start.
Okay. So, folks, we're going to be in Leviticus chapter 9. That's our first chapter we're reading from. And then here in verse 1, it says, "Now it came about on the 8th day that Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel, and he said to Aaron, 'Take for yourself a calf and a bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering, both without defect, and offer them before the Lord. Then to the sons of Israel you shall speak, saying, Take a male goat for a sin offering, and a calf and a lamb, both 1 year old, without defect, for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for peace offerings, to sacrifice before the Lord, and a grain offering mixed with oil, for today the Lord will appear to you.' So they took what Moses had commanded to the front of the tent of meeting, and the whole congregation came near and stood before the Lord. Moses said, 'This is the thing which the Lord has commanded you to do, that the glory of the Lord may appear to you.' Moses then said to Aaron, 'Come near to the altar and offer your sin offering and your burnt offering, that you may make atonement for yourself and for the people, and then make the offering for the people, that you may make atonement for them, just as the Lord has commanded.' So Aaron came near to the altar and slaughtered the calf of the sin offering, which was for himself. Aaron's sons presented the blood to him, and he dipped his finger in the blood and put some on the horns of the altar and poured out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. The fat and the kidneys and the lobe and the liver of the sin offering he then offered up in smoke on the altar, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. The flesh and the skin, however, he burned with fire outside the camp. And then he slaughtered the burnt offering, and Aaron's sons handed the blood to him, and he sprinkled it on the altar. He sprinkled it around on the altar. They handed the burnt offering to him in pieces with the head, and he offered them up in smoke on the altar. He also washed the entrails of the legs and offered them up in smoke with the burnt offering on the altar. Then he presented the people's offering and took the goat of the sin offering, which was for the people, and slaughtered it and offered it for sin, like the first. He also presented the burnt offering and offered it according to the ordinance. Next, he presented the grain offering and filled his hand with some of it and offered it up in smoke on the altar, besides the burnt offering of the morning. Then he slaughtered the ox and the ram and the sacrifice of peace offerings, which was for the people. And Aaron's sons handed the blood to him, and he sprinkled it around on the altar. As for the portions of fat from the ox and from the ram, the fat tail and the fat covering, and the kidneys and the lobe of the liver, they now placed the portions of the fat on the breasts, and he offered them up in smoke on the altar. But the breasts and the right thigh Aaron presented as a wave offering before the Lord, just as Moses had commanded. Then Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people and blessed them, and he stepped down after making the sin offering and the burnt offering and the peace offerings. Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting, and when they came out and blessed the people, the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. Then the fire came out from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the portions of fat on the altar. When all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces." Wow. Okay. Guys, we got the Father lighting the fire of these sacrifices. How amazing is that? Because this, we see this in 1 Kings chapter 8 when Solomon dedicates the temple, fire from heaven drops, lights the sacrifice. 1 Kings chapter 18, Elijah on Mount Carmel having a showdown with the prophets of Baal for political and religious control of the nation. Fire drops down, lights the altar, right? Amazing, right? So this is another precedent for this, which I think is fascinating because what do we think is going on here? Like, do you think that, where do you think the fire is coming from? When it says the Father, let me see, in verse 9, verse 24, the fire came out from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the portions of the fat. Now, verse 23 says, and when Aaron and Moses came out of the tent of meeting and blessed the people, the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. What do you think that is, sweetie?
Well, I think the answer to that would, require looking back at some prior context that was made for us as far as understanding what this phrase, the presence of the Lord, actually meant.
That's right. We did an entire video, right, about the angel who goes before you?
Yes.
what, 2-3 weeks ago?
Yeah.
Maybe a month ago.
Angel of the presence.
That's right. And this is actually something that's spoken about in additional books. A book that's not actually in the American canon, but it's in the Eastern Orthodox Coptic canon, which is also referred to as like the Ethiopian canon. But it's this idea in Jubilees chapter 1, verse 28, and also chapter 2, verse 1, where it says that there are specific angels that are called the angels of his presence. And they do big stuff like this, right? And so this one's been with them ever since they came out of Egypt.
Right.
This one's been with them the whole time, which is what the Father told them would happen in Exodus 23, that he was going to send this angel with them to guard them, basically, to lead the way, but that the angel himself was not going to pardon sin, but he was just going to help them in certain capacities. And so we already saw back in Exodus, 33 in the tent of meeting moment, where the angel dropped down and then Moses speaks face to face with the angel. And it says that Moses spoke with the Lord face to face as a man speaks with man, right? So, but the very next chapter, in Exodus 34, Yahweh says, no one can see me and live. So in the past, without me putting chapter 33 and 34 of Exodus together, I thought, oh man, he must have seen God's face and been talking to God. You know, I was all excited. But then I was like, wait a minute. How can he say no one can see me and live? And in fact, the whole point of him passing by and just kind of seeing the backside of whatever he saw and putting Moses in the cleft of the rock to shield him, to guard him, was so that he wouldn't die. Then how in the world is he talking to something in Exodus, the chapter right before, face to face? So no, the Torah is not contradicting itself, right? God's word's not contradicting itself. And then when Jesus and talks about no man has seen the Father, right? In John chapter 5 and other places, I'm sitting here going, okay, well, no man has seen the Father. But his angels who minister to those who receive in salvation, which is what Hebrews 1:14 tells us, are sent as agents to do his will and his purpose and to carry his message. This angel has already been presented to us in the context of the story of the Israelites coming out of Egypt, and his purpose has already been explained, right?
Right, and we see this phrase used prior about the glory of the Lord descending. So. And it's when Moses is at the top of the mountain and that angel, the presence, is there. As we know from the book of Jubilees, he's being given the Torah and all this stuff at that time, you know, all this understanding and teaching. And it's happening through the mediation of the angels, and specifically this angel of the presence.
That's right.
But it says the glory of the Lord descended on the mountain. So then here in this chapter, we have the glory of the Lord is going to be shown to the people in the camp.
That's right. Yeah, the Father doesn't say, I'm going to reveal my personal face to everyone in the camp and appear before you. Because did everyone die?
Exactly. No, they survived.
Was everyone hidden in a cleft of the rock like Moses had to be in Exodus 34? So no, this is the angel coming out of this pillar of cloud that's still hanging out by them, right? To apparently reveal himself in some way, some capacity, and he brings the fire that lights the sacrifice, which is why the fire comes from the Lord. But it's always, these things are done through agents, right? And so this is why in the other cases that we've talked about, like I just mentioned, 1 Kings 18, 1 Kings chapter 8, you got these unique statements about fire coming from heaven. But that's not made in this chapter. It doesn't say fire came from heaven, or what we have heaven defined for us in Genesis 1 as the firmament. So it doesn't say that fire came from heaven. It says that fire came from the glory of the Lord that had just descended amongst them, right? So this is a unique concept here. And if nothing else, it's probably just a great reminder for the people what he had already warned them about in Exodus 23, which was that, hey, I'm sending this super powerful angel ahead of you. Remember, this angel was the one that went around behind them when they were fleeing in Exodus to get in front, between the fleeing Israeli or Hebrews, but between Pharaoh, who's coming after him with his army. Right, and he scared the entire army of Pharaoh. So this is not somebody to be trifled with. This angel was like super powerful. So and we're about to see in the following chapter just what that means.
Yeah. One thing I want to point out, guys, here is more gospel of the kingdom symbolism going on here in the book of Leviticus, because we have this happening on the 8th day. And I think that, there are a couple of days that we tend to focus on. The third day is something that seems to be mentioned throughout Scripture. Obviously, the 7th day is holy, but there's also the significance of the 8th day. We have circumcision is commanded on the 8th day. The Feast of Sukkot, we have an extra, bonus feast of the 8th day, a bonus festival.
So the Feast of Addition.
Right. So here we have the priests have spent 7 days inside of the tent of meeting being ordinated. And then when they come out to have the glory of the Lord presented to them, this is on the 8th day. So if you think about the symbolism of the coming kingdom, Sean had explained last week a little bit about kind of our theory about the timing of when we're resurrected up into the New Jerusalem and Yeshua is descending to do battle. And that we speculate based on these kinds of examples in the scripture.
From Leviticus 8 and the ordination of the priests.
Exactly. Yeah. That it's possible that we'll be up in the New Jerusalem for a 7-day period while Yeshua just, rains down wrath and just totally roots out the wicked out of that area of land and burns it and cleanses it for the city to come down. So if that's the case, think about when we set down, we're going to be celebrating on that 8th day.
That's right.
The Father's presence is being revealed to the nations at that point in time. They already have seen Yeshua has come down, that battle has happened, and now his house is coming down. And we're going to be ordinated as his holy royal priesthood.
That's right.
So there's a lot of really cool symbolism going on here when you have a good picture of the gospel of the kingdom in your mind as you're reading it. So I just think that's exciting.
Yes, and that's what we're always trying to remind folks to remember. All the prophets talked about the gospel of the kingdom. The message given to the prophets by Yahweh was about the gospel of the kingdom to come, the moment where he would dwell amongst mankind with his sanctuary forever. This is layered all the way back, and this is done through the ability from what the Messiah accomplished for us because of his obedience, even unto death on a cross, but through his resurrection unto his royal priesthood, which allows him the authority and the ability to stand before the Father, call out our names, raise us from the dead on the last day, give us this robes of white and righteousness taken into the New Jerusalem, being ordained as a royal priesthood,
cleansed.
Right? This whole concept of this being eternally clean and, having our hearts eternally circumcised to the Father's ways so that we'll always be able to abide with the Creator in his house. And that's just an amazing promise. This is the gospel of the kingdom of God that was made possible by Yeshua being obedient to his Father, so that's why we praise Jesus of Nazareth, right? That's why we praise Yeshua HaMashiach, right? He's the one who has made this all possible by the, being sent by the Father and faithfully carrying out all the commands of his Father. So it's a beautiful promise. This is the gospel of the kingdom. Yeah. And we see nothing but parallels and symbolism everywhere in the story of these children of Israel coming out of the Exodus.
Yeah.
And everything they're being taught and learned. Because, like we've said, this is literally, he's given them the Father's instructions for living and how to abide and behave in the Father's house, right, in his sanctuary. So this is a glimpse at our future, guys.
Yeah.
People always look for like specific prophecies, like fortune cookie cutter prophecies, right? Like one or two lines that basically say exactly, what's going to happen at a certain time. Right. Well, guys, we've got this wonderful promise of the entire millennial reign that's going to happen. And as a result of this, you're going to see the fulfillment of everything being taught to the children of Israel here coming out of Egypt. It's an amazing concept. And all of it is us fulfilling everything that they were being taught and instructed, right? We're being fulfilling it forever. And as we have his laws put on our heart at the resurrection.
So, yeah, I think people just really ignore Leviticus and Numbers, and they are actually missing a whole lot of like golden nuggets in there that, are teaching us about our lives, our eternal lives as priests in that kingdom.
Yeah, it's a audacious claim when you really take a bird's eye view to say that, all this instruction given to the Israelites coming out that God called righteousness, right? That God called his behavior that's kept in his sanctuary, that they're practicing in a shadow or a copy, if I should say, of the sanctuary above, right? That they're all doing this behavior and trying to be taught this behavior, that all that was for nothing.
Right.
It's crazy that the Father just gave them all this stuff. Was he just trying to keep them busy while they're in the desert?
Or to it's crazy. Burden them. Oh, let me just burden you so I can, for thousands of years, so I can then eventually send someone to free you from that burden.
Yeah.
Our Father doesn't work that way.
A lot of stuff taken out of context, a lot of misunderstanding. So, hey, speaking of, that's why we're starting a new show, aren't we? Oh. Well, maybe I'm starting a new show.
He's starting a new show.
But I view you as part of this. So
I know.
Basically, we're Kingdom of Context is starting a new show that's coming out next month, and it's called Torah Apologetics. So we're excited about that, right? Because we actually get to we're going to be addressing and tackling some of those passages in the New Testament, mostly from Paul's letters, that have always been taken wildly out of context. What's interesting is there's a lot of things that Paul says that people, because they haven't read the Old Testament, people take these things out of context. And then there's a couple things that Paul says that would fully support the Old Testament. But again, because they haven't read the Old Testament, they don't recognize it what they're reading, and their eyes just glaze right over to the out of context passages. It's very fascinating, subjective reading. You know, how they blame husbands for having subjective hearing. You know what I'm saying? It's like subjective reading of the New Testament. It's wild. Only seeing what they want to see. So we're actually doing a whole new series that's going to be addressing many of these passages and books and concepts taken wildly and poorly out of context, so that we are addressing directly the era of dispensational teachings.
Right. Yeah,
because
so that
that
you guys can go and address them.
And our goal, is to make them packaged in a way so that they're palpable, so that you can actually go either through sharing them with friends or family, or just be able to relate the ideas yourselves in a way that hopefully will help you have a better conversation with those whom you love and care about, whom also have been kind of blinded by this crazy teaching that sprung up amongst the modern American society a couple hundred years ago. It's actually, I found out recently that this teaching goes way back into Judaism, but that's actually a different conversation. We'll be addressing that as well on the show. So stay tuned as we call it Torah Apologetics, and we hope that you catch those episodes as well.
Yeah, I know that when I first came to Christ, like one of the themes I was watching all the time was apologetics, but in the sense of explaining the Bible to unbelievers. And I know, I still love videos like those, and so we wanted people to be able to have something like that specifically about Torah and this conversation that goes on between people in churches and people who've left the churches, and how to defend your obedience to the commandments.
Now, will this be like just my good ideas on how to defend the Torah?
I don't think so. I think it's going to actually give everybody a lot of screen time, and it's going to talk about all different sides of the conversation.
That's right. So not only will we be doing interviews for the new show, but there'll be lots of scripture for us to chew on. So this is the idea of keeping everything in context, right? That's our goal. That's our passion. Do you want to start with chapter 10?
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you.
Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans, after putting fire in them, placed incense on it, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, "It is what the Lord spoke, saying, By those who come near me I will be treated as holy, and before all the people I will be honored." So Aaron therefore kept silent. Moses called also to Mishael and Elzaphan, the sons of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, and said to them, "Come forward, carry your relatives away from the front of the sanctuary to the outside of the camp." So they came forward and carried them still in their tunics to the outside of the camp, as Moses had said. Then Moses said to Aaron and to his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not uncover your heads nor tear your clothes, so that you will not die, and that he will not become wrathful against all the congregation. But your kinsmen, the whole house of Israel, shall bewail the burning which the Lord has brought about. You shall not even go out from the doorway of the tent of meeting, or you will die, for the Lord's anointing oil is upon you." So they did according to the word of Moses. The Lord then spoke to Aaron, saying, "Do not drink wine or strong drink, neither you nor your sons with you, when you come into the tent of meeting, so that you will not die. It is a perpetual statute throughout your generations. And so as to make a distinction between the holy and the profane, and between the unclean and the clean, and so as to teach the sons of Israel all the statutes which the Lord had spoken to them through Moses." Then Moses spoke to Aaron and to his surviving sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, "Take the grain offering that is left over from the Lord's offerings by fire, and eat it unleavened beside the altar, for it is most holy. You shall eat it moreover in a holy place, because it is your due and your sons' due out of the Lord's offerings by fire, for thus I have been commanded. The breast of the wave offering, however, and the thigh of the offering you may eat in a clean place, you and your sons and your daughters with you, for they have been given as your due and your sons' due out of the sacrifices of the peace offerings of the sons of Israel. The thigh offered by lifting up and the breast offered by waving they shall bring along with the offerings by fire of the portions of fat, to present as a wave offering before the Lord. So it shall be a thing perpetually due you and your sons with you, just as the Lord has commanded. But Moses searched carefully for the goat of the sin offering, and behold, it had been burned up. So he was angry with Aaron's surviving sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, saying, Why did you not eat the sin offering at the holy place? For it is most holy. And he gave it to you to bear away the guilt of the congregation, to make atonement for them before the Lord. Behold, since its blood had not been brought inside into the sanctuary, you should certainly have eaten it in the sanctuary, just as I commanded. But Aaron spoke to Moses, Behold, this very day they presented their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord. When things like these happened to me, if I had eaten a sin offering today, would it have been good in the sight of the Lord? When Moses heard that, it seemed good in his sight.
Thank you, sweetie.
Yeah.
How tragic. How tragic. Okay, strange fire. What's the strange fire? What's going on here? It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
So we have four sons of Aaron. Two of them, I guess they got excited, maybe?
I'm not sure.
Is the assumption that they were drunk?
That's the traditional explanation and assumption is because that commandment comes right after this seemingly freak accident, freak situation, that would have been, that's what basically they assumed.
Yeah,
is that
these guys were drunk, which
thought,
had them made the wrong decision about taking the incense and doing the wrong thing with it.
Right.
So
yeah, and it sounds like what the problem was the fire itself. There's a fire burning inside where the altar of incense is, and then you have fire out for the brazen altar,
which is what all these sacrifices they put on the altar in chapter 9. So that's where they got this fire, put it in their fire pans.
That's what we assume.
That's what we assume.
Because
that's
they
were
fire source.
Because they were outside the inner tent of meeting. They were outside near the brazen altar doing all this stuff with these sacrifices. Got excited, put some of that fire from burning the animals, which is not the kind of fire, nothing to do with inside the tent of meeting. And then they took that inside the tent of meeting with the incense and tried to offer it before the Lord. And that's when bad things happen. So, and from what I can understand from the application of these ideas, which is what we took the time to set up with explanation in chapter 9, was that this angel who supplied the fire from the glory of the Lord that showed up, possibly supplied the fire that shut out and took care of Nadab and Abihu's mistake, right? Which would reinforce exactly what was said in Exodus 23. That he will not pardon your sins. Like, this is not somebody to mess with. You do exactly what he says, because everything he was saying and doing was being told to him by Yahweh. He was the mouthpiece of Yahweh. So not only does this reinforce their obedience to this angel that's hovering near them in a cloud by day, fire by nights, but we also see even a precedent for this with Revelation 11, with the two witnesses. Anyone that tries to attack them, fire comes out from them and destroys them. Right. So this is not like it's an uncommon idea, And of course, Nadab and Abihu, even if they were drunk, or even if they weren't drunk, they were doing something that would be considered, I guess, very unclean, right? Is that possibly the way it goes? Because you're using fire that's burning carcasses of animals?
That's all I can think of, because they would have been, they themselves would have been physically clean from, they never left that actual area for that 7 days. So that's all I can think of, is that they grabbed coals or whatever from that altar where all this, burnt parts of animals and fat and stuff are falling in there. And I would think that would be, it's strange somehow to the Father. It's fire he did not authorize to be brought in. So.
That's right.
We're just speculating at this point as far as what was strange about it, but
definitely unauthorized is probably a good word.
Definitely
because it was against the instructions, right? So it's outside of the actual commandment. But now imagine this scene, guys. Imagine this scene. All the congregation gathered near for this day, right? Yeah. So 7 days, Aaron, his 4 sons, were undergoing the ordination for their priesthood, which means in the sight of all the people, these guys are being set up as a ruling concept, right? The priesthood did judgment. They were in a sense rulers, right? We talked about the crowns last week, okay? Yeah. So this whole concept was they were an authority figure to look to that were supposed to faithfully keep the commandments of the Father so they can mediate for the people.
Moral standard.
So you got 2 of these 5 people that the whole congregation is supposed to look to as a part of the high priesthood, right? And they're disobeying the instructions. Right. So in a sense, like, an example has to be made.
Yeah.
It absolutely has to. Everybody's watching.
Yeah.
So if these guys just blatantly go and ignore the instructions they were just given, what kind of precedent would that set? You know, and Aaron, my heart goes out to him, but he humbly behaved after this, right?
Yeah.
He didn't lash out. He didn't do something crazy. You know what I'm saying? He didn't like knock over the brazen altar or whatever, or go like set the tent of meeting on fire in his anger or something like that. You know what I mean? He just
lost his appetite.
He lost his appetite, right? And he kept his mouth shut. And this is where, you know, we see in the following verses at the end of the chapter where Moses asks Aaron, hey, why didn't you eat the sin offering? You're supposed to do that. And what happened?
Aaron's like, man, it's been a rough day. My heart is not in it.
Yeah, I know the wording's a little vague,
yeah.
right? But this is what we gather from this entire exchange, this entire thing. He said, behold, and this is verse 19, but Aaron spoke back to Moses, saying, behold, this very day they presented their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord. When things like these happened to me, if I had eaten a sin offering today, would it have been good in the sight of the Lord? Yeah. So the dude is probably in shock still. He just lost his two of his four boys. And he's having to keep his mouth shut and just keep doing his business for the minute because, you know, things got serious, right? Yet this angel's there, right? Who's not playing around, right? And so I think that, you know, so here's what I'm trying to point out. Aaron not ignores, but doesn't do the commandment to eat the sin offering, which is what we just read back in, what was it, Leviticus 5 or 6? Mm-hmm. And Moses is like, hey, this is you were commanded to eat the sin offering. What's going on? Like, so I'm sure Moses is worried. Yeah. Because he just saw Nadab and Abihu break a commandment, right? Yeah. And got immediate punishment. And now he's watching Aaron break a commandment. Yeah. He's like, wait a minute, what's going on, right? I can only imagine like this happening in like a whisper, right? Yeah. Like, because everyone's watching. Yeah. So I can only imagine Moses is like, he goes to the altar, he sees the sin offering was burnt up and wasn't eaten. And he was, or at least the portion that was for Aaron and his sons. And he goes back to Aaron and he's like, so, you didn't eat this sin offering. What's, you know, probably not as dramatic, but the point is, it's a heartbreaking moment. But at the same time, you know, Moses says, yeah, you're probably right. Yeah. It's probably not good. And here's the thing. Did Aaron get killed?
No. So
it's a unique moment, right? Severity of punishment, right? For people that what we're kind of surmising here or kind of speculating is happening because of drunkenness. Two priests maybe had a little bit too much wine at the celebration, and they got a little drunk, and then therefore they went and they did something kind of blatantly against the command, compared to Aaron doing something, refraining from doing a command because his heart wasn't in it, right? Not because he was not of sober mind, right? Which is a whole different type of intentionality. But it was just because he was mourning and sorrowful and his heart wasn't in it. So how in the world, you know, this is a great example is what I'm trying to say is that had the father had just struck down Aaron there in that moment as well, then we've got, in my opinion, you would have what people try to make him out to be. Right. This horrible God who's just waiting to hit you with a hammer. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Big bully in the sky.
This is two guys that blatantly disobeyed a command. They received their punishment for it because they'd already been warned about this angel beforehand anyway. And they'd already been instructed what to do. And they're standing in front of everybody and they blatantly do it wrong under the auspices of them possibly even being drunk while they're trying to do this. And then you got Aaron not doing a part of the command in the very same day and mercy being shown unto him because of the circumstance. And this is the reason why I think this story is so powerful, because it shows the nature of the Father, right? Yeah. He does want us to do commands and come to him with the right heart. Nadab and Abihu did not have the right heart. Yeah. Aaron did, but his heart was just conflicted because he was in mourning because of natural circumstances. Yeah. These are just natural concepts that happened that kept Aaron from faithfully performing the Torah, the law. And he's literally the head of all of the Torah, right? He's the high priest.
Yeah, he would have just been going through the motions. Right. If he had eaten the sin offering with that state of mind and that state of heart, he would have just been doing it, to do it and get it done. And that's not the right heart.
That's right.
He wants us to desire to do these things and to delight in them and find joy in them.
That's right.
And we see from Moses' reaction that it was good in Moses' sight, that it was an understood thing, that it was like, sorry, man.
Yeah, it was. And we see semblances of this concept in later prophets to where when Israel was in rebellion, both the southern and northern house was in rebellion, and people were just going through the motions to keep the commandments through the priesthood, but their heart wasn't in it, and the Father called them out on it.
Yeah.
Which is why he has to make a statement in Ezekiel 44:9 where he says, in the future, in his sanctuary, no one uncircumcised in heart or in flesh will enter his sanctuary, right? He doesn't just want you going through the motions. Like he understands. I mean, we're talking about the God who can see the thoughts and intents of the heart, right? So he understands that, and he wants your heart. So this is why I love about this moment. Some people try to point out this moment to be such a strict moment of, see, look how awful the Torah was. And I'm like, actually, no, those guys were blatantly disrespecting God. But here we have a moment where Aaron, there's a huge amount of sympathy from Yahweh to Aaron concerning a practical circumstance, because the Father's cool. He understands. Yeah. So I think it's a wonderful passage to point to show the heart of the Father, how merciful and loving he is. And so anyway. Yeah. Anything else in this chapter stick out to you?
One thing to point out is about that commandment about not drinking any wine before entering the sanctuary. So one thing I want to point out is that as we have these ongoing conversations with people on social media about these various topics of Scripture, I see a lot of people saying, well, we don't have any idea what was done under the Melchizedek priesthood, and we don't know what a Melchizedek priest's duties are, and so we can't really know what Yeshua is doing. And that's not the case. First of all, this book was named after a guy called Levi, and he was doing a lot of these things way before Mount Sinai ever happened. And really what's going on with the book of Leviticus at the time of Mount Sinai, the law is being revealed in its fullness. So the laws surrounding the physical tabernacle, tent of meeting, those kind of laws, commandments for, possibly the regular Sabbath day and daily morning and evening sacrifices that were done in the sanctuary, those things are being revealed at this time because the context is right for those things to be revealed. But a lot of these other sacrifices were going on probably since the time of Adam, since we see Cain and Abel bringing fat portions. That's a term found in Leviticus. So we can glean from Leviticus the actions of our high priest. And one of them is this concept of not drinking wine before entering the sanctuary. Because what does Yeshua say in the New Testament?
Matthew 26.
To his disciples, he says, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine again until I drink it new in my Father's kingdom. Why would he say that? Because he's about to be our high priest and enter into the heavenly sanctuary. He's not drinking any wine before he goes.
That's right. He's going into the utmost presence of the Father, because it's Hebrews 4:14, right? That we have such a faithful high priest that can ascend through the heavens to minister before the Father in his holy sanctuary. So
stone cold sober for 3,000 years.
That's right.
All for us, guys. But so I just want to, anytime I have an opportunity to point out something that Yeshua is clearly doing, according to Leviticus, I want to show people, because we can glean into what the Melchizedek priesthood entailed.
So if Yeshua is called a high priest, right? There was never two sets of instructions given for a Melchizedek or a Levite, right? In fact, Levi got his priesthood from a Melchizedek.
Exactly.
It was the same concept passed down. So what you're talking about, sweetie, is circumstantial instructions that happened with the children of Israel on Mount Sinai. But many of the meat, the core of those instructions, were already being done by the priesthood that was already in operation since Adam. And this concept, like you said, you see even all the way back in Genesis 4, not only was Abel bringing the meat, the fat portions, right? But what was Cain bringing?
Fruit of the ground.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what was it? A grain offering? Or was it a first fruits?
I don't know.
Could have been either one.
Fruits,
Could have been both, right? Yeah. The point is, they already had these, and Exodus 18, they're doing a burnt offering. They already knew what that was. Yep. Even the whole conversation, I think we discussed this in our very first Exodus kingdom portion called Wicked and Adulterous Generation, where we review the first few chapters of Exodus, and even the conversation that Moses is sent to have with Pharaoh. Right. Which is to say, hey, Father wanted me to come tell you to let my people go so we can go worship on the mountain 3 days journey into the wilderness. Well, he didn't say to the burning bush, to the angel in the burning bush talking to him, he didn't say, what does worship on the mountain mean? Right. No, they already knew the definitions of these concepts. They knew they needed their animals to go with them, right, to go worship on the mount. They knew they needed the people to go, and they needed all these certain concepts to happen to go actually do quote unquote worship, which was these sacrifices with these animals. And so it blows my mind for people to think that they didn't already have these ideas or definitions. Here's an example of what I'm saying real quick, because you did a great job, by the way. I just want to add to just a little bit. So this idea here is that if we were to literally claim that this Torah, which is the instructions of God given to the Israelites on Sinai, if we were to try to claim that was the only time they got those instructions, well, where do we draw the line? Many people just say that in the context of being for sacrifices. But what about murder?
Right.
Adultery, stealing,
yep.
Kidnapping, all these other things that were included in the instructions. This is why we said in our video that we did on that portion of Exodus, it's called a renewed covenant.
Right.
This is why he says that this is the covenant I gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if you do all these terms of the covenant, I want to have this covenant with you too, right?
Yeah.
He had to remind them because they were forgetting much of this while in their oppression in Egypt, and they had to be reminded and brought back into a new covenant. It wasn't it was a renewed covenant. The same covenant offered to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And as the book of Jubilees tells us, same covenant offered back from Noah through Shem, back to Noah, back all the way to Enoch, all the way back to Adam. So the whole concept is, This isn't new information. It's the Father's always said, look, these are my ways. This is how I behave in my house in heaven, and all the angels behave like this. I want to offer this to mankind so it'll go well with you if you behave like this, since now you need to know instructions, since now your mind has been darkened after the Garden of Eden moment, and you need to know wisdom and instruction. So emulate my ways, and everything will go great with you. And by the way, since you're not perfect, and you are now corrupted, and you're going to mess up, I'm going to give you a priesthood in addition to all these instructions, that's going to be a mediator for you when you mess up, right? So the whole thing was insulated, which is why we see patriarchs before Sinai doing the duties of a priest. We've covered this previously, but we just want to remind folks in case this is the first time you've ever seen us. So this concept is like, I would never suggest that suddenly the Father was just not, like the Father just at Sinai decided, you know what? This murder thing is probably bad. We should probably just maybe they shouldn't do murder either. Yeah. You know what I mean? When he's chastising Cain for murdering Abel, right?
Well, Joseph, when Potiphar's wife is trying to come after Joseph, he says, I cannot sin against my God.
That's right.
So
when he's refraining from doing adultery.
Yeah.
So this is the concept. They already knew this is the Father did not leave mankind without revelation of wisdom of how to behave. And this whole concept of sin, transgression, and atonement has been instituted since Adam, since the beginning. Because the moment that mankind, fell from their garden-like perfect status, that suddenly they're transgressing. So there has to be a natural play out of these concepts and events. So this is a huge misunderstanding that has been propagated by both Judaism and Christianity. Is that suddenly they think Sinai was the only time the law was given. It's such a narrow view of the text itself, and it's refuted in about 15 different ways just from Genesis, And so I just want to encourage folks on that, because what we're reading here is part of that, what we talked about, the circumstantial instructions. Right. So they didn't have this specific tent of meeting, they didn't have this specific tabernacle with the bronze altar, and they didn't have this specific priesthood going through a specific lineage that had to be ordinated like this in this same capacity because of their descendancy. So this is why a lot of these stories are even being told, to give you all the extra circumstance of what's happening here. So anyway, it's just beautiful because our high priest Yeshua is doing the same law. The law is eternal. The law is not changing. It's not a double standard. It's a single standard. And it's eternal. It's light, according to Proverbs 6. Psalm 119 says it's eternal, verse 160. So this whole concept is that it's not something that was just made up at Sinai, and now Yeshua is doing some other standard that we've never seen, right? It's the same standard we're seeing.
Well, and as you clearly said earlier, the Melchizedek priesthood was given to Levi. So this dichotomy that people have created between the Melchizedek versus the Levitical, I agree there's a dichotomy there in its fulfillment in the kingdom, and Yeshua is clearly of that order, and right now on earth, the earthly priesthood of the Levitical priests is not in operation and things like that. But this strange...
Because why? Because it was prophesied.
Yeah.
Okay.
This strange dichotomy that suddenly these two priesthoods are completely different from each other, and somehow Yeshua has different duties than a Levitical priest. Well, if you go all the way back to when Levi was given the priesthood, it was given to him through Jacob, and that was a Melchizedek priest giving that priesthood to Levi. So in all reality, that dichotomy is kind of just a man-made dichotomy. It's not really in the scriptures.
Absolutely.
I mean, there are two priesthood, but as far as there being different duties for each, in the testaments of the 12 patriarchs, in the book of Levi is accounting when he was given the priesthood from Jacob, and he says that his father Jacob taught him the ways of all the peace offerings and thank offerings and the burnt offerings. So these phrases that we clearly see in Leviticus.
That's right.
So.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, it's a very established concept, but unfortunately in our modern culture, it's one that hasn't been taught or understood. And so misunderstandings have been propagated instead. So we hope to clear those up for folks to bring more clarity to the word. All right, I'm going to jump into chapter 11 real quick, and we're going to learn about what food is called food and what animals are called not food.
Okay.
Okay. Verse 1, it says, "The Lord spoke again to Moses and to Aaron, saying to them, Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, These are the creatures which you may eat from all the animals that are on the earth. Whatever divides a hoof, thus making split hoofs, and choose the cud among the animals that you may eat. Nevertheless, you are not to eat of these among those which chew the cud, or among those which divide the hoof. The camel, though it chews the cud, it does not divide the hoof. It is unclean to you. Likewise, the chiffon, for though it chews cud, it does not divide the hoof. It is unclean to you. The rabbit also, for though it chews cud, it does not divide the hoof. It is unclean to you. You shall not eat any of their flesh, nor touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. These you may eat. Whatever is in the water, all that has fins and scales, those in the water, in the seas, or in the rivers, you may eat. But whatever is in the seas and in the rivers that does not have fins and scales, among all the teeming life of the water, and among all the living creatures that are in the water, they are detestable things to you, and they shall be abhorrent to you. You may not eat of their flesh, and their carcasses you shall detest. Whatever in the water does not have fins and scales is abhorrent to you. These, moreover, you shall detest among the birds. They are abhorrent, not to be eaten: the eagle, the vulture, and the buzzard, the kite, the falcon and its kind, every raven and its kind, the ostrich and the owl, and the seagull and the hawk and its kind, and the little owl, and the cormorant, and the great owl, and the white owl, and the pelican, and the carrion vulture, and the stork, and the heron and its kinds, and the hoopoe, and the bat. All the winged insects that walk on all fours are detestable to you. Yet these you may eat among all the winged insects which walk on all fours, those which have above their feet jointed legs with which to jump on the earth. These of them you may eat: the locust and its kind, and the devastating locust and its kinds, and the cricket and its kinds, and the grasshopper and its kinds. But all the winged insects that are four-footed are detestable to you. By these, moreover, you will be made unclean. Whoever touches their carcasses becomes unclean until evening, and whoever picks up any of their carcasses shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. Concerning all the animals which divide the hoof, but do not make a split hoof, or which do not chew cud, they are unclean to you. Whoever touches them becomes unclean. Also, whatever walks on its paws, among all the creatures that walk on all fours, are unclean to you. Whoever touches their carcasses becomes unclean until evening. And the one who picks up their carcasses shall wash his clothes and become unclean until evening. They are unclean to you. Now these are to you the unclean animals among the swarming things which swarm on the earth: the mole, the mouse, the great lizard and its kinds, the gecko and the crocodile, and the lizard and the sand reptile, and the chameleon. These are to you the unclean animals. These are to you the unclean among all the swarming things. Whoever touches them when they are dead becomes unclean until evening. Also anything on which one of them may fall, whether they are dead, when they are dead, becomes unclean, including any wooden article, or clothing, or skin, or a sack, any article of which use is to be made. It shall be put in the water and be unclean until evening, and then it becomes clean again. As for any earthenware vessel in which one of them may fall, whatever is in it becomes unclean, and you shall break the vessel. Any of the food which may be eaten on which water comes shall become unclean, and any liquid which may be drunk in every vessel shall become unclean. Everything, moreover, on which part of their carcass may fall becomes unclean. An oven or a stove shall be smashed. They are unclean and shall continue as unclean to you. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern collecting water shall be clean, though the one who touches their carcass shall be unclean. If a part of their carcass falls on any seed for sowing, which is to be sown, it is clean. Though if water is put on the seed and a part of their carcass falls on it, it is unclean to you. Also, if one of the animals dies, which you have for food, and the one who touches its carcass becomes unclean until evening, he too, who eats some of its carcass, shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. And the one who picks up its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. Now every swarming thing that swarms on the earth is detestable, not to be eaten. Whatever crawls on its belly, and whatever walks on all fours, whatever has many feet, in respect to every swarming thing that swarms on the earth, you shall not eat them, for they are detestable. Do not render yourselves detestable through any of the swarming things that swarm, and you shall not make yourselves unclean with them, so that you become unclean. For I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am holy. And you shall not make yourselves unclean with any of the swarming things that swarm on the earth. For I am the Lord who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. Thus you shall be holy, for I am holy. This is the law regarding the animal and the bird and every living thing that swarms in the waters and everything that swarms on the earth, to make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, between the edible creature and the creature that which is not to be eaten. Okay, there's 3 things right off the bat I just want to talk about. Smashing ovens.
Oh, yeah.
Do we got a smashing oven? If you ever cooked a Christmas ham in your oven, do you need to go smash your oven?
I mean, if you move into a house and you have no idea what the person who lived there before you cooked in it, do you need to take it outside like office space?
Oh my gosh. Is this like some kind of weird commercial for Sears appliances where everyone just got to go buy new appliances? No, folks, no. This is talking about earthenware vessels, which is what it explains in the following verse, an earthenware vessel. Also in Deuteronomy 14, which is what we already covered in our Deuteronomy kingdom portions, it actually goes into greater distinction on that.
Yeah, and even in my little footnotes, it like points out that it's a hearth that supports 2 pots. So it's a little clay thing. Yeah. It's not an actual stove like we've got in our kitchens.
Yeah, it's not, and the metal is not an earthenware, so it doesn't hold it. So the metal can be cleaned, but yeah, so brick or clay.
Although an office space party, might be fun.
What? Oh, when they beat the printer.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Sorry. Yeah. I sorry.
That was totally over his head. Sorry, guys.
Wasn't over my head. It was a very obscure reference. So yeah.
That's not obscure. Everybody knows Office Space. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well.
Aw, you're so sweet.
That's awesome. I'll try to insert something in here that will make it relevant. Okay, I was trying to think of the other quick thing I wanted to talk about. Also right here where it talks about if there's a clean animal that dies and you touch it, then you become unclean.
Right.
Or if someone eats, it's like if a clean animal dies and then you end up eating that animal, you become unclean until evening. Okay, so what I would imagine this is having as a practical application is, say you own sheep, which are a clean animal, and one of them dies for whatever reason. Maybe he's just old. I don't know, but he dies. And then but he's a clean animal and he's part of your food source. So you're just going to throw him away? Of course not.
Right.
If you see him die that day and you get to him relatively quick, then you can still slaughter him properly and you can actually serve him as a food source. The people who eat it and the people who touch it still become unclean until evening, but it's okay because it's still saying you can eat that thing. So the reason why would this be put in here, right? So what if you had to travel to the temple? What if the feast of Shavuot's coming up, or the feast of unleavened bread, and you need to go present yourself to the Lord, right? And what if it's like that the day before, right? Well, or the day of, that morning of, right? Maybe you don't eat it that day. Right. Maybe you choose from you just let that one go, let the value of that go, just from natural death circumstances, and you just grab a live one and you take care of that. Because you still need to be clean, right, for that. But maybe it's 3 days before you have to go and present yourself to the Lord, so you can be unclean for that day after you eat that clean animal that died,
right?
And it'd be okay because by the time it's required for you to go present yourself to the Lord, you're clean again. So it doesn't matter. So that's why even like little stuff like that, there's these caveats of just like practical application. Right. It's not burdensome.
And this is an animal dying of natural causes somehow because, like we said in our last episode, the priests can slaughter a clean animal in the tent of meeting and do what they need to do, and touching that carcass of that dead animal does not make them unclean. So we just wanted to point out the distinction there, that this isn't an animal that's being slaughtered for sacrifice.
That's right.
This is a carcass away from that whole system, and probably, a lay person being spoken about, and then they would become unclean through that. But the priests were not unclean when they were slaughtering those animals.
Right. I imagine a shepherd or his son or whoever's tending the sheep for the guy who owns the field and the sheep. He sees an animal fall over. He goes over there. He doesn't know what's going on. Dies. But he's like, "Hey, boss, do you want to eat this tonight, or do we want to let it go?" So I just think it's a little practical instruction. But what's the overarching concept of Leviticus 11? Is that there are animals and part insects and fish that you can eat. Mm-hmm. So when the Father made all things, right? Was it
Yes.
Day 5, day 6, he's making all these concepts, all these living creatures in the water and on the land. He knew they were going to be eaten. What we just talked about in the last chapter. The Father doesn't have two standards. Right? He doesn't have this standard of, oh, by the way, now that I'm giving you a Torah, you can eat meat. Mm-hmm. Right? Or, oh, by the way, now that it's the flood, after the flood, you can eat meat because it's going to take a while for you to grow food.
Or even as I've seen some arguing lately, telling Noah just in that period of time that he could eat everything.
Jeez.
All animals were okay for him to eat.
No, it's the Father's got one standard, and that's why he's literally spelling it out for us. He's laying it out for us detail by detail, taking the time to do this. Right. An entire chapter. And there's another one in Deuteronomy 14 that supplements this chapter. So I think that it's just amazing that he's given us not only these concepts to say, like, these are the animals that you can actually eat and consume. These are the insects that you can eat and consume. These are the fish that you can eat and consume, right? So there was not a vegan at creation. Yeah. Adam and Eve were eating stuff. Yeah. So and in the process of him, remember, the same guy who's never changes, mm-hmm. right? The same guy who's consistent in all his ways, which is what we depend on for our salvation, also says, by the way, in this concept called sacrifice, which is us making a meal together, you can eat animals, right? And by the way, we're going to be doing these in his heavenly sanctuary, mm-hmm. right? Isaiah 57 or 56, I think. It's just amazing that he's going to accept our sacrifices because we're going to be doing them properly in all regards and with the right heart in our resurrected bodies in the New Jerusalem.
Yeah, people might wonder why this would be any kind of a valid point to make, that, meat was eaten before the flood. Father had plans for these animals when he created them. But, you'll see there are all kinds of arguments out there where people just naturally say meat was not eaten until the flood, and Father never meant for us to eat animals. It's this terrible tragedy, and when we're in the kingdom, we're not going to have to kill animals anymore and all this kind of stuff. But, even all the way back into Genesis, he separates the beasts of the field from cattle. Mm-hmm. When he's saying these things were created, and we know cattle is livestock. Cattle is animals that are used for labor and for food. Mm-hmm. So he even, right at the beginning, he separates, these two groups of animals, and one of them happened to be cattle. And so, from the very beginning, we can't act like he didn't know what he was doing when he made everything. And so this is what I try to tell people when they ask me about following the dietary instructions. And I try to call them dietary instructions and not food laws or anything like that, because this is really what it is. I just try to remind people that the creator of all things would know what's good for the human body and what's not good for the human body. Yep. And he would know what he created to be food and what he created to be the cleanup crew and the things that, eat all the other junk on the planet that the clean animals don't eat. So that's what I try to explain to people, is that it's not this list of arbitrary rules only for this special people who, once they're following him, then they have this special diet. It is a set apart diet, and I will say that because all of his instructions are to set you apart from the rest of the world. But ultimately, this is his definitions of what he created to be food and what he did not create to be food. Mm-hmm. And when I've explained it that way to people, I see those gears turn where they're like, "Wow, that makes sense." And I've never really liked pork, or shellfish has kind of always creeped me out. Like, people have a natural aversion to some of these animals, even as far as thinking of them as food. So, I think that's part of, the creator's, his makeup in us, that some people would naturally not like some of these unclean foods. Animals, I should say.
What I think is fascinating, sweetie, is this on day 5. So let's get technical with this argument, right? is that, these things weren't even made to be food to begin with. That's what some people claim. And that only after the flood or only here at Sinai were things made to be eaten as meat. Well, let's look at what the descriptions of Leviathan and Behemoth that were made on day 5, right? And so we got this from 2nd Ezra 6. We got this in the book of Enoch, chapter 60. We got this in Jubilees, chapter 2. We got in a whole bunch of other places. Isaiah 27 talks about when Leviathan is going to be slain by the Messiah at his return, because they were created on day 5 to be food sources for the survivors of the day of the Lord concept. That's amazing. Yeah. So this is before even Adam was created. The Father had intended from day 5, knowing the whole story, how it was going to take out. And there was going to be a moment where he was going to descend to the earth and mass carnage was going to happen. The world was going to try to fight him at his return. And there was going to be survivors from the nations left over after the day of the Lord. And they were going to need food because the whole world has been the whole world has been severely destroyed in a sense where, the grocery store isn't operational anymore, right? Yeah. So all the survivors of the day of the Lord come to the New Jerusalem. And in the interim moments, they literally have the option for the Behemoth, which is a massive thing, and the Leviathan, another massive thing that's in the sea, to be an actual food source for the people. So this is, to me, like just doing a study on those two concepts blows away this argument as far as like that he just suddenly changed his mind on what was food. Now, from literally the creation week, he knew how the story was going to take place. He knew he's going to have to send his son. He knew how everything was going to unfold. And he already knew what was food and what was not. So it's super, super easy in my mind. But I know some people really, really, really struggle against this badly.
I'm an animal lover, you know, and I don't think I could ever slaughter my own lamb or anything like that. But, I've also been raised and conditioned in a world where animals are basically elevated to the status of human beings. So while, I definitely am a dog person and I treat my dogs like my kids and everything like that, I do have like that understanding that, okay, well, we are higher than the animals and there's an animal kingdom and there's, the kingdom of men and we have dominion over them and they were created for certain purposes and one of those purposes is food. And so, I'd be very grateful for the priests that I would take my sweet little lamb to and have them prepare for me. Because, I think it's normal that, a lot of us maybe couldn't slaughter our own animal. I understand that. But at the same time, we have to be realistic about the fact that everything was created with a purpose. And animals, some of them have a very specific purpose, and that is to be on your plate at dinner time.
That's right. It's part of our social conditioning to like you said, elevate them to a point of a necessity while that same culture wants to abort babies even after birth.
Yeah.
So it's a strange doctrine of demons that just gets instituted everywhere. But ultimately, I think in Leviticus 16, when they brought the goat forward for the scapegoat that they would release in the wilderness, I don't think they put little, goat pajamas on him and watched him jump away. You know what I'm saying? They knew the role, right? They didn't make the goat cute because they knew how people react.
True.
In fact, I remember watching an interview and a documentary about the guy that went to try to find Noah's Ark. I can't remember his name right now. He's a Christian. He went on an expedition. And while giving a presentation about his expedition on the way back, he said he was in Iran. And I don't want to get into the geography of Noah's Ark, but, this guy went looking for it in Iran, in the mountains of Iran. And apparently on his journey, they ran out of food. They got robbed at one point from locals in this one village. And then they were at the next village trying to barter with, to get a goat or a lamb so they could have it for food. But they didn't know how to slaughter it, right? So they were trying to figure that part out too. And so he goes to one of the villagers to help him with the slaughtering process. And when he gets back to his team that was on the expedition with him, they were already playing with the goat and they had named it. And they were already loving on it. And he's like, no, we got to eat this thing.
Don't make friends with it.
Yeah, he's like, you can't name it. We're about to kill it, man. We're going to starve to death if we don't, so it's a common human understanding and trait that we love God's creations. But
they have little...
everything has a purpose, guys. And this is something that we really want to... The Father's telling us, and in a whole chapter here, what the purpose is for different animals. So I'm going to take his instructions.
Yeah. I have family that has farm animals, and they're big on giving their farm animals accurate names. So like the cow that they had was Sir Angus McBeef.
Nice.
You know, the chickens are various, you know, menu items from Chick-fil-A. Like because they had children and they didn't want their children, you know, to be so attached to the animal that when it was time to actually eat it, that the children wouldn't be okay with that. So, you know, part of that process was, all right, we're going to name this, you know, after the dish that we're going to turn it into at a certain point. So...
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Sir Angus McBeef. I remember that.
I think those are some good names Chick-fil-A may adopt. Okay, guys, let's see. Our first pairing that we want to move to is actually from the Nevim, part of the prophets here. We're going to go into the book of Judges. And I like it when we get to the book of Judges. We don't always get to get into that one, but it's a fun book to pair up. And this one is going to be in chapter 6, verses 11 through 24. And just here in verse 11, it says, "And the angel of the Lord came out and sat under the oak tree that was in Oprah, which belonged to Joash the Abizarite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress in order to save it from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, 'The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior.' And then Gideon said to him, 'Oh, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us?'" Boy, haven't we heard that before? It's like a modern day complaint, right? He says, "And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, 'Did the Lord not bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of the Midian." And the Lord looked at him and said, Go in this your strength, and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you?" I love how the Father's always using rhetorical questions. It's crazy. All right, verse 14. "The Lord looked at him and said, Go this in your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you?" And he said to him, "O Lord, how shall I deliver Israel? Behold, my family is the least in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my father's house." But the Lord said to him, "Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat Midian as one man." So Gideon said to him, "If now I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that, if now if I have favor in your sight, show me a sign that it is you who speak with me. Please do not depart from here until I come back to you, and bring out my offering and lay it before you." And he said, "I will remain until you return." Then Gideon went in and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. He put the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot, and he brought them out to him under the oak and presented them. The angel of the Lord said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock and pour out the broth." And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord put out the end of his staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. Then the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. When Gideon saw that he was an angel of the Lord, he said, "Alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." The Lord said to him, "Peace to you. Do not fear. You shall not die." And then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and named it, "The Lord is Peace." And to this day it is still an Oprah of the Abizarites. Okay. I think I said that word poorly at the end there. But interesting. Okay. So what do we see as a parallel to what we read in Leviticus, sweetie?
The fire of the Lord.
Isn't that interesting? That the angel brings the fire to light the sacrifice.
Yes.
So this is what we're talking about, in the Leviticus portion here. People just want to assume that God just shows up and appears to everybody. So the glory of the Lord will appear to you tomorrow. Well, we already have a full-on context for what that really was,
right,
which was this angel that went before them and what he was capable of doing and how he brings the fire. And so we see the same concept. And Gideon's like, "I saw the angel of the Lord face to face." He's all excited, you know what I mean? Because he would have heard about this guy back from his forefathers in the days of the Exodus. He even quotes from something we just read back in Leviticus chapter 10 about, "I'm the God who brought you up out of Egypt," right? About all the miracles done to the forefathers. So he's referencing back to that moment in his history, saying, "Where's the Lord at?" And then suddenly, the same guy who is a part of that history is right before him, lighting a fire for him. You know what I'm saying? Like, how amazing is that?
Well, and how interesting is it that we see that phrase face to face?
Right.
Because, we have this concept that, Moses spoke to the Lord face to face. Well, that means he was with Yahweh, the Lord. Well, no. If we go and we look at how these terms are used in other areas, we see it's actually talking about an angel that he spoke with face to face.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just, see, this is one of those moments where if we're looking at, passages that refer to the angel of the Lord and interactions with an angel and mankind, that helps us gather a greater context to what we might have read from the Exodus. Does that make sense? So this is how we're always trying to encourage folks to look for context of ideas, right? So sometimes you find context in the passages around the statement, right? Other times you have to read a full chapter, maybe even the chapter before it or the chapter after it, to get a greater context of that, of that statement or idea. But sometimes you have to take the idea that's being mentioned and look for all of its uses throughout the scriptures, and you get a greater context to that idea. It gives you a ton of clarity, right? And it helps you keep, from going off into strange tangents and doctrines, like you're proclaiming that the Son of God was sent way before the cross as the angel of the Lord in Exodus, because that is not what is being told to us in the book of Exodus.
That's literally how we let Scripture define Scripture.
Yeah.
That's how that process works.
Yeah, if the Father is sending people in His name, in His authority, to give a message or to help or to be a miraculous agent in some moment, and that message has to be consistent with what the Father has given other peoples throughout time. This is the concept of how, otherwise you're probably off on some weird tangent. It's probably not an angel of the Lord. Right. You know what I mean? It's like an easy way to discern. And so, yeah, there's just there's the greater context in some of these ideas that we have to look for and be students of the Word. So, do you want to start our Ezekiel 42 pairing?
Yes.
So, guys, we're going to read from Ezekiel 42. This is just going to be verses 13 through 20, and then we're going to continue reading into Ezekiel 43, the first 9 verses.
All right. Then he said to me, the north chambers and the south chambers. Oh, by the way, guys, if you haven't read Ezekiel chapters 40 through 48, it starts out basically Ezekiel's being shown the millennial temple. All right.
Then he said to me, the north chambers and the south chambers, which are opposite the separate area, they are the holy chambers where the priests who are near to the Lord shall eat the most holy things. There they shall lay the most holy things, the grain offering, the sin offering, and the guilt offering, for the place is holy. When the priests enter, then they shall not go out into the outer court from the sanctuary without laying their garments in which they minister, for they are holy. They shall put on other garments. Then they shall approach that which is for the people. Now when he had finished measuring the inner house, he brought me out by the way of the gate which faced toward the east, and measured it all around. He measured on the east side with the measuring reed 500 reeds by the measuring reed. He measured on the north side 500 reeds by the measuring reed. On the south side he measured 500 reeds with the measuring reed. He turned to the west side and measured 500 reeds with the measuring reed. He measured it on the 4 sides. It had a wall all around, the length 500 and the width 500, to divide between the holy and the profane. Then he led me to the gate, and the gate facing toward the east, and behold, the glory of the God of Israel was coming from the way of the east, and his voice was like the sound of many waters. And the earth shone with his glory, and it was like the appearance of the vision which I saw, like the vision which I saw when he came to destroy the city. And the visions were like the vision which I saw by the river Chebar, and I fell on my face. And the glory of the Lord came into the house by the way of the gate facing toward the east. And the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the house. Then I heard one speaking to me from the house, while a man was standing beside me. He said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell among the sons of Israel forever. And the house of Israel will not again defile my holy name, neither they nor their kings by their harlotry and by their corpses of their kings when they die, by setting their threshold by my threshold, and their doorpost beside my doorpost, with only the wall between me and them. And they have defiled my holy name by their abominations which they have committed. So I have consumed them in my anger. Now let them put away their harlotry and the corpses of their kings far from me, and I will dwell among them forever.
Amen.
Awesome. I love Ezekiel.
It's great. Quick point of note. He said, they defiled my holy name by their abominations. So this is a little bit different distinction than when he says in other passages that they profane my name among the nations where they've been scattered. Mm-hmm. So that concept of profaning his name comes from the idea that they are scattered. And therefore, everything he brought them out of Egypt to accomplish with them was now like egg on Yahweh's face, right? They've profaned his name and his authority because Yahweh was forced to scatter them because of their disobedience. Yeah. So that means everywhere under the heaven where they were scattered and the people knew, oh, those were the people of Israel. They used to have their own land, but their God scattered them because they couldn't even be obedient to their God. They served other gods, right? And this was, in my opinion, many of them would have known the ancient stories from Egypt. Right. To be like, oh, but isn't he the one that brought them out of Egypt with all those miracles and everything? And because remember, we see other nations even talking about this
Right.
at different places,
Right.
in the Old Testament, that people that weren't of Israel, they had all heard the story various times. Jethro, the Rahab, like the various places. So I just think it's fascinating as a little point of distinction, because these words matter. So the concept of defiling his name, which what he mentioned previous visions that Ezekiel in this passage here, right? And if we go back to Ezekiel 8 and 9, we see other visions that Ezekiel has, right? About how, remember we read that one, it was several weeks ago, we read about the failure of the priesthood that was happening during this time, which led to the deportation of the southern kingdom into exile in Babylon. So again, this kind of the context of the timeline is that Ezekiel is talking to us while in exile in Babylon. That's the moment of him having this vision. And as a result, he's referencing back to a vision that he had of what had taken place in the actual rebellion of the priests in his temple, defiling his name by their abominations. They were worshiping other gods in the rooms of the temple.
Right.
It's crazy, right? Ezekiel chapter 8. It's wild. So I just think that that's an interesting point to note. What sticks out to you, sweetie?
Well, I mean, we paired this certain, section here because we see a couple of the concepts that we were just reading about in Leviticus. So we see the priests, having a certain holy place to eat of the sacrifices, their garments, needing to change their garments. And we see the glory of the Lord filling the house.
That's right. And they need to change their garments as to what? Not transmit holiness to the regular people, right? So this even shows us, again, another mention of that, because we read about that from Ezekiel 44 last week, I believe. So here's another mention of that concept. And you got this concept of the glory of the Lord filling the house again, right? And it's interesting. But what I always try to remind folks is that Ezekiel 40 through 43 and 44 gives us, well, I apologize. It's actually through 48 ultimately, because it's a much bigger area that it describes. The tent of meeting was made, as Hebrews chapter 8, verse 4 and 5 explained to us. The tent of meeting that we see them interacting with in Leviticus chapters 9 through 11, that was a replica of the sanctuary in heaven, right? It's a very small replica, right, of the showbread table, the menorah, the altar of incense, the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, it seemed to be just the sanctuary
just some very small furniture pieces in very small areas. But the overall big expanded concept that we're reading about here in Ezekiel and all those measurements you read about, when you actually put those measurements down, according to most, translators who believe to translate that into modern measurements, this would be the equivalent of a 70-story building laying on its side 4 squared. It's massive, much, much bigger than the tent of meeting, right? But these rooms and these inner compartments that's being described in here is analogous to all the space being filled in the open courtyard area of the smaller version of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, and that layout, if that makes any sense. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, in Jubilees chapter 32, angels show up to Jacob and they give him these tablets from heaven with like all this stuff written on them, and Jacob gets excited. He wants to build the tabernacle, right? And God's like, no, you're not the dude to build it. I don't want you to build it here. I appreciate your zeal, but you're actually even going to die in Egypt. You're not even going to die here. So like, just be encouraged, but keep moving, right? That's going to be for somebody else down the road. Well, pattern and the copy was actually shown to Moses on Mount Sinai several hundred years later for the small interior Holy of Holies, or the holy place, and then the interior Holy of Holies part with some of the furniture. Okay. Well, several hundred years later, you get the greater vision shown of the actual city and the buildings of this place that are around the actual sanctuary in the temple that was replicated on Sinai. And then later, in the days of John, you get an even greater picture of the entire mountain of God, the New Jerusalem, with its 1,500 square mile walls.
Yeah, because what we're reading about, this description in Ezekiel here, this is specifically this temple inside the New Jerusalem.
That's right.
So it's not the New Jerusalem itself being described in these areas. It's this temple where the new Levite priesthood is going, the restored, I should say, is going to be performing all of their duties. We do see some other descriptions later on, like the river and trees of life, and that's clearly New Jerusalem, descriptions. But this particular building that's being measured here is specifically that temple. So
that's right. So imagine, like a modern movie where you start off on a small object and it zooms out right? And you see the fullness of that small object. That's the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. And then it zooms out greater, and you see the city that object's inside of, right? With all the roads going in and out, and there's probably a river somewhere. And so that's the Ezekiel vision. And then it zooms out even greater to like the entire continent. That's the New Jerusalem. Okay, so that's in visual fashion, if I could help you understand it a little bit better. And then, of course, the mention of it to Jacob and what he saw, we never get actually detailed for us. Right. So that's just like, hey, that's just a whisper of like, what? You want to build something on earth? Your sanctuary wants to dwell with mankind forever?
Let me do it.
Let me do that. I'm excited. I'll build it right here. And he's like, no. I got other plans.
I love it.
Yeah, it's amazing. So the next pairing that we want to go to is going to actually be in Ephesians chapter 5, and we're going to read the first 21 verses. So here in Ephesians 5, it says, "Therefore be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love, just as Christ also loved you, and gave up himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. But immorality or any impurity or any greed must not even be named among you, as is proper among saints. And there must be no filthiness and silly talk or coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. For this you know with certainty, that no immoral or impure person or covetous man who is an idolater has any inheritance in the kingdom of God, in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore do not be partakers with them, for you were formerly darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of the light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness and righteousness and truth, trying to earn what is pleasing to the Lord. Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them. For it is disgraceful even to speak of the things which are done by them in secret. But all things become visible when they are exposed by the light. For everything that becomes visible is light. For this reason it says, 'Awake, sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Therefore be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. So then do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. And do not get drunk with wine, for that is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody with your heart to the Lord, always giving thanks for all things in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ to God, even the Father, and be subject to one another in the fear of Christ." Wow. Okay. So we wanted to pair this one up because it's got a lot of fun stuff in it, right? It's a lot of foundational ideas being mentioned very quickly, because guess what? It's Paul, right? This is a dude that knew the first part of the book inside out, right? The law and the prophets. He knew all that stuff inside out. So he can make these quick ideas in just rapid succession. He can talk about them and expect you to know what he's talking about, right?
Yeah, and he clearly knew a lot of these books that have been taken out. Yeah. Because, like, if you guys go and read 2nd Esdras, you'll see all kinds of things in that book that you can tell Paul has quoted.
Yep. So. He's also First Timothy, I think it's chapter 6. He's talking about God dwells in unapproachable light. Mm-hmm. Well, we only find that in Enoch, the book of Enoch. I believe it's chapter 15. So, and there's many other places actually, but they clearly had more books available to them than just the 40 that we have in our modern day Bibles as what we would call the Old Testament, right? Yeah, he had a lot more available to him.
Paul didn't just have a lot of that information just downloaded, like he had studied it in those books. Right.
Well, some people will say he did because they'll say he had that revelation that he had a vision of God, and
Well, yeah.
And he was given he was explained to him the mystery, but you have to remember this guy was already trained in all the knowledge of Israel as a very zealous Pharisee. So he had already had access to all these books of their history from their prophets. But interesting in verse 2, right, we have Yeshua being compared as giving himself up for us as an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. Well, here's a great example, right? Mm-hmm. Was Jesus burned to become a fragrant aroma? Isn't that what we read in the last 2 weeks in Leviticus? Right. These offerings that were put on the fire, an offering by fire to the Lord, and it's a pleasing aroma, right? It's exactly what we see from Genesis 9 and Noah doing. Was Jesus burned? Did his ashes and his burned body ascend to heaven as a pleasing aroma to the Lord, like is referenced with all these altar sacrifices with meat? No, of course not. We know the story of the crucifixion of Yeshua and his burial and his resurrection. He's not burned. He's not a literal burnt offering that puts off an aroma. So this is Paul expecting you to have read Leviticus or Numbers or any of the Old Testament to understand these terms that he's using here, because he's he needs you to, so you can understand exactly what he's comparing everything to. So I just think it's very wonderful. And we get some great admonitions in here as far as verse 18, do not get drunk with wine, for that is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. So we kind of saw that concept in Leviticus chapter 10.
Yep.
These guys are being supposedly drunk with wine according to the layout of that context, and therefore it led to their downfall, so to speak. Yeah. If I could put it like that.
Yeah.
What sticks out to you in this passage, baby?
Oh, I think you covered exactly what we chose it for.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. There's a lot of fun stuff in here, but just talking about obedience and not being, don't partake in disobedience. But I think verse 21 is amazing. Just be subject to one another in fear of the Lord. Mm-hmm. In fear of Christ, it's just because he is the judge. So, all right, our next passages we want to go to with our pairings is going to be in 2 Esdras chapter 2, and we're actually going to read the first 13 verses here. Verse 1. Verse 1. Thus says the Lord, I brought this people out of bondage, and I gave them my commandments by men servants the prophets, whom they would not hear, but despised my counsels. Their mother that bare them said unto them, Go your way, you children, for I am a widow and forsaken. I brought you up with gladness, but with sorrow and heaviness have I lost you. For you have sinned before the Lord your God, and done that thing that is evil before him. But what shall I now do unto you? I am a widow and forsaken. Go your way, O my children, ask mercy of the Lord. As for me, O Father, I call upon you for a witness over the mother of these children, which would not keep my covenant, that you bring them to confusion, that their mother to a spoil, that there may be no offspring of them. Let them be scattered abroad among the heathen. Let their names be put out of the earth, for they have despised my covenant. And woe unto you, Asher, thou that hides the unrighteous in you. O you wicked people, remember what I did unto Sodom and Gomorrah, whose land lies in clods of pitch and heaps of ashes. Even so also will I do unto them that hear me not, says the Almighty Lord. Thus says the Lord unto Ezra, Tell my people that I will give them the kingdom of Jerusalem, which I would have given unto Israel. Their glory also will I take unto me, and give these the everlasting tabernacles which I prepared for them. They shall have the tree of life for an ointment of sweet savor. They shall neither labor nor be weary. Go, and you shall receive. Pray for a few days unto you, that you may be that they may be shortened. The kingdom is already prepared for you. So watch.
Love that passage.
Yes, so we had a wonderful passage here, just in the concept of dealing with, Ezra. This is from the prophet Ezra, in case you're not familiar what the book of 2 Esdras is. So it's the prophet Ezra, and so he's one of the returning exiles from Babylon. And not only was he a scribe and a priest, but he was also a prophet, and he spoke lots of things. And this is he's actually part of the crew that was responsible for restoring about 200 plus books in his day, which would line up with all the historicity of where many of these ancient manuscripts date back to, which is anywhere from the 5th to the 3rd century BCE, where they have a lot of the copies of these books. Yeah. So what's interesting, sweetie, is that in this conversation here he's talking about the rebelliousness of these people, right? He gave them his law through his prophets. They rejected it. The metaphoric concept of the mother of Jerusalem being spoken of. She's now forsaken and a widow. Isn't that sad? That's interesting, right? Usually you're a widow if you were married to somebody, right?
Right.
So anyway, so that's interesting that she's kind of forsaken. Because doesn't Isaiah chapter 62, verse 4 and 5 say that we will marry the land, which is the New Jerusalem?
Yeah.
Isn't that same terminology being used here?
Your land will be no longer called desolate.
Forsaken.
Or forsaken.
That's right.
Your land will be called married.
That's right. So here we have the actual concepts of Jerusalem. And this is why he goes on later in the verse 10. He says, I would have given them the kingdom of Jerusalem, which has always been the Father's house, the promised New Jerusalem to come.
Right.
But they didn't, they rebelled, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's fascinating because, and people, to me, it's like you can't make a case of distinction to say that it's supposedly going to someone else, because he even says in this passage, I would have given them the kingdom of Jerusalem, which I would have given to Israel, right? So but of course, they've been rebellious, right? So this is where now they're scattered, and during all these years that were scattered and people start calling to mind his commands and coming in faith and obedience, everyone's being grafted into this idea of Israel, right? And so now when the New Jerusalem comes and we're all gathered to it at the first resurrection, we're all being brought to it, and she'll no longer be considered forsaken or widowed shall now be called married, which is what Isaiah 62, verse 4 and 5 talks about. It's amazing. It's beautiful. So this is just a great little passage here, and it's talking about how this kingdom has already been prepared for you, right? So this is always the intended plan. This is actually what Enoch chapter 25 says as well, as Enoch got this vision of seeing the heavenly Jerusalem come down, and I think that that's fascinating. Real quick, he says, verse 11, their glory also will take unto me and give these the everlasting tabernacles which I prepared for them. Didn't we just read about a big city with a bunch of different structures in Ezekiel 40 through 44?
Well, we read about a temple with lots of structures.
Yeah, we did. If you keep reading
if
you keep reading the whole thing, right?
Yeah, Yeshua does also say, in my Father's house
are many rooms.
Are many rooms. That's
right. And that's what we saw. Well, I just referenced Enoch 25 because Enoch sees those rooms as well. And he actually references them, I want to say in Enoch chapter 61 as well. Speaking of Enoch, this is our next pairing.
All right.
Yeah.
It's our last pairing.
It's our last pairing here. So in Enoch chapter 45, real quick, we're just going to read these first 6 verses. Verse 1, and this is the second parable concerning those who deny the name of the dwelling of the holy ones and the Lord of spirits. And into the heaven they shall not ascend, and on the earth shall they not come. Such shall be the lot of sinners who have denied the name of the Lord of spirits, who are thus preserved for the day of suffering and tribulation. On that day mine elect one shall sit on the throne of glory, and shall try their works, and their places of rest shall be innumerable. And their souls shall grow strong within them when they see mine elect ones, and those who have been called upon my glorious name. Then I will cause my elect one to dwell among them, and I will transform the heaven and make it an eternal blessing and light, and I will transform the earth and make it a blessing. And I will cause mine elect ones to dwell upon it. But the sinners and the evildoers shall not set foot thereon. For I have provided and satisfied with peace my righteous ones, and I have caused them to dwell before me. But for the sinners there is judgment impending with me, so that I shall destroy them from the face of the earth. Okay. It's the gospel of the kingdom of God, guys. It's all over the book of Enoch, everywhere. And this is just another great distinction between those who have been considered unrighteous, evildoers, those who are rebelling against the commands of Yahweh, and then also the righteous, those who took through faith and obedience to following his ways, out of their heart's desire. And he's promising them that he's going to give them this, not only this kingdom, but a place to dwell amongst his Messiah, the elect one, right, who sits on the throne of glory. And he's also talking about how they'll be satisfied with peace, and they'll be able to dwell before him. So there's a distinction made between verse 2 and verse 6 in this passage, where he talks about his elect one who sits on the throne of glory. That's prophesied. That's our Psalm 2 moment, right? This is our Ezekiel 37 moment where, he's chosen his servant to be king over the resurrected Israel forever. This is Yeshua, our Messiah, right? Our king and priest. And the Father himself will dwell here, right? This is what he talks about also in Ezekiel 37, how my sanctuary will dwell among them. So this is the promise of Enoch 1:5, that the Father and the Son would descend to dwell on the earth among mankind. But the Son is kind of like our king, our high priest, our go-to, right, which is why Hebrews 1, the first 3 verses, says that he was made in the exact image and representation of the Father. So he's speaking the Father's words. He's doing the Father's things. This is why we'll look to him as our God, as our King, as our high priest. Because he is King of Israel, but he literally has all authority in heaven and earth given to him, according to Matthew 28:18, by the Father, to rule in the Father's authority, right? Until all things have been wrapped up under his feet. Right. Then he turns all authority back over to the Father, as 1 Corinthians 15, verse 23 and 24 expound to us with great detail.
Yeah, and
it's a beautiful promise.
That'll be on the millennial
eighth day. So this is to help us come full circle to Leviticus chapters 8, 9, and 10.
Yeah.
So because we'll be that royal priesthood that's already gone through ordination, and we'll be with the Father and his Son, his elect one, the Messiah, in his house, which is the kingdom promised to us, Jerusalem. Right. It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So
it's an incredible promise.
Guys, thank you for joining us again this week. It's just it's an honor to be doing this for you. It's a pleasure. We thank you so much for participating with our channel. Please like, share, and subscribe this video if it blessed you. Please make sure you ask questions in the comment section. Also, go check out our Facebook group we talked about. We paired up with our brother Ken Heiderbrecht from the channel Hanging on His Words. And so this concept is called Kingdom in Context / Hanging on His Words. And this is where if you've seen any of those two channels videos, you can go to this Facebook group and you can ask questions, or you can, have fellowship for other folks that like those teachings as well. So it's a wonderful avenue to be able to make videos for you guys. And we really appreciate your love and your prayers so that we're able to continue to do this according to our schedules and continue to be able to provide stuff that we feel is relevant, and also stuff that we feel is not being talked about by the majority of people, right? Which is this concept what we have been trying to emphatically show within the scriptures, which is the gospel of the kingdom of God, which is what Jesus and all the prophets emphatically talked about. So we feel like I want to be talking about what Jesus was talking about, right? What would Jesus do? He would talk about the gospel of the kingdom of God. So this is what I'm trying to do, Hey, sweetie, isn't it interesting that isn't it ironic that you had an entire fad and craze in like the late 90s, early 2000s with the "What would Jesus do" bracelets?
Yeah.
What would Jesus do? He would keep Torah.
Yeah.
So I just think it's funny that they didn't even people that would teach dispensationalism to think that the law is done away with and you don't have to do the commandments of God. Simultaneously, at the same time, we're passing out bracelets to their youth departments for the kids to wear that would say, "What would Jesus do?"
Right. And nobody ever actually bothered asking the question.
Yeah, to look at Jesus' behavior and say, wait a minute, he's keeping the commandments of God. That's also referred to as the law of Moses by Jesus. And he's telling us to keep them, and he's keeping them himself. And so I'm just going to do what Jesus would do.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you. And we hope to see you back here next week on Kingdom Portions. Shabbat Shalom.
Have a good weekend.